Hi, it's Brian Schmidt from DungeonNotebook.com. Today we're going to take a look at how to track ammunition in the Tome of Delving. Before we get started, I just want to note that I'm using a printout of the page here. I'm not using an actual Tome of Delving. The reason why is because I'm about to write on it with this Sharpie. You, of course, ought to use a pencil rather than a pen or a marker for this ammunition tracking, but I found that pencil just doesn't show up in the video. So I didn't want to ruin a tome, so I'm using the Sharpie here. So the first thing to notice about ammunition tracking is that there are 3 places where you can indicate the location of where these arrows or bolts are coming from. So perhaps that's a quiver that you're carrying or something that you've left in storage somewhere. So I'm going to start out by indicating that this is a quiver that I'm carrying. If you're striving for ultimate realism and you really want that extra level of detail, you can track the capacity of your quiver separate from how many arrows you have in it. So to do that, you use a vertical line to indicate the capacity of the quiver, and then any spot that is empty, meaning that you don't have the quiver full, you would indicate with a little dot underneath the circle. So if I have a quiver of 17 arrows, I've got room to add 3 more. So I indicate that by putting a little dot underneath the bubbles here, indicating that those spots are empty. So that's how you would track the capacity of your quiver. Now, every time you shoot an arrow, you want to mark that off. I recommend doing that just by putting a dot in the bubble. Why? Because it's much easier to erase. Now you can go and do a whole big X or a check mark thing, but you're going to be reusing this many times. And every time you're going to erase it, and there's going to be a little bit of damage to the paper. It's just an inevitable consequence of using pen and paper in a pen and paper game. So I recommend making light and relatively small indications every time you fire an arrow. Of course, you'd be doing it a little differently with a pencil than I'm doing with this Sharpie. If your DM is allowing you to recover expended arrows, normally it's 50%. So this is 17 arrows expended, which means it's going to be 8 arrows that I can recover. So if I'm tracking capacity in my quiver, I now need to erase all of this. And because I can't erase Sharpie, I'm going to indicate it on this next row. The capacity of the quiver hasn't changed. It's still 20, but now I have 8 arrows. So that means there are 12 arrows I have, or 12 spaces that are empty. 6, 7, 8. Those are my 8 arrows, and the rest of these are empty spots. Now with that said, I don't particularly like that approach. I'm going to show you how to keep track a little more simply in this second group of bubbles here. So this is another quiver that I'm carrying. And this time, in this quiver, I'm not going to track the quiver capacity. I'm only going to track how many arrows I have. And let's say that this one starts out full. I have 20 arrows. So again, I use a vertical line, and I know that I have 20 arrows to shoot. So once I've exhausted all of these arrows, I now can recover 50% of them. So that means I get 10 more arrows. So 10 more arrows puts me out here. And then I record the expenditure of those 10 arrows. Half of 10 is 5. I recover 5 of those arrows. Half of 5 rounded down is 2. Half of 2 is 1. And that's why there are 38 bubbles in a row. Because if you have a full quiver of 28 arrows and you use a 50% recovery, once you've used them all, you'll get out here to 38. So now what you can do is not keep track at all and just keep shooting your arrows. For every quiver of 20 arrows, once you've filled all 38 bubbles, you know that you've shot all those arrows and you've recovered as much as you can. Then you need not do any of these vertical lines. Now, there's a couple of complications that could come up. What if you have an arrow that can't be recovered? You've shot a couple arrows into a gorge, or you shot them into a dragon and the dragon flew away. My recommendation is to use an X. So if my quiver started out as 20 arrows and I lost a couple, let's say I fired 5 arrows and then 2 into a gorge and another one into a dragon that flew away. Once I've used the rest of my arrows, I now know that there were only 17 arrows of those 20 that are recoverable. So now 17, half of that is going, and rounded down, is 8. So 28 is right here. So now I just have these 8 arrows that I've recovered. Again, you follow the same process. Maybe again I lose an arrow or 2. So this time I only have 6 recoverable arrows. So of the 6, half rounded down, not that there's any rounding in that case, is 3. And this time I get lucky and I recover all of them, all that I can out of those 3, which means 1. And I recovered that last arrow and used that, and now I've expended all of these arrows. So that's how you would accommodate the situation of lost arrows. You mark them a little differently, and now you can see recoverable arrows from unrecoverable arrows. Take the total of your recoverable arrows, divide it in half and round down, and then mark a new line to indicate how many arrows you have left until you've completely exhausted this supply. If the page starts to wear thin due to too many erasures, that is why there are multiple rows of bubbles under each location. I find it helpful to indicate which one I'm actively using. Then when I've erased this row too many times, I stop using that one and indicate the new row. This can help prevent some confusion if you've got multiple rows that you can still read some of the old marks that you haven't erased very well. But if you use pencil and make a light mark and as small a mark as possible, you still want something you can read. But by using just dots, they erase easily, and you're sure to extend the life of the paper as long as possible. And that's how to track ammunition in the Tome of Delving.